Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Rocker Mike and Rob Presents show. I'm Rocker Mike, and we got the legendary Rob Rossi in the top right. Hello,
How
Rob.
you doing?
And today's a very special show, like they all are. And I've been really excited to have this guest on for the last couple of months. His name is Mark Leadon. He is a author of a book called Cretin Family, which is about the Ramones. He's a tremendous Ramones fan, like myself. See, okay, that's the book right there. And it's funny because I've known about this book for I want to say at least 6 months, and Mark actually reached out to me to see if I wanted, because we were friends on Facebook, to see if I wanted to possibly discuss it. And I love it when people reach out to me. It makes my job that much easier. So thank you, Mark. Welcome.
As I just said, just backstage, greetings from England. It's absolute pleasure to be on your show. So thank you very much.
Cool. So, Mark, I know we talked a couple of times in leading up to the show, and I know you're a tremendous Ramones fan. Give us a little backstory on how you got into the band.
Well, it's probably back in 76, 77. There was a punk explosion. I'm a teenager, so I was probably 15-ish at the time. And first of all, in England, it was, really at the time, Sex Pistols, Clash, Damned, Stranglers.
Right.
And I hadn't really heard that much of the Ramones. I describe myself a bit at that stage as a little Englander. So I didn't really know about the Ramones that much. And I loved the punk bands in England, but there was something a little bit just missing for me. I wasn't really into the politics of the Clash or the Pistols. The Stranglers are a little bit slow for me. And then a mate at school, his name was Alex. I remember it really well. He gave me a tape, one of those old-fashioned tapes that you could wind rounds and cassettes. He gave me one of those. He says, "Have a listen to this. They're quick. I think you'll like these." So I didn't really know much about them. Took the tape home, listened, and it just blew my mind. The first time I heard it, I remember thinking initially how quick the songs were, and I wanted to know a bit more. I just loved it. So I went down next day, bought the first album. It was the first album that the tape that he lent me. I remember looking at that cover, the first album cover, being transfixed to these four geeky looking blokes in the leathers and the jeans, with Dee Dee's and Johnny's hair. Did they really cut their fringe like that?
Yeah.
We've got the gawky Joey, who's about 7. He looks about 7 foot tall. Are these guys for real? If you walk down the street, are they going to mug you? And then I remember thinking to myself, I had plimsolls on, I had jeans, I had a t-shirt on, all I needed was a leather jacket, and I was one of the clan. And a couple of days later, I went down a market in Notting Hill, which is, I'm a Londoner. Went down there, bought myself a leather jacket, and I was, we're a happy family. And that was my time, and just absolutely loved. It must have been probably 77. And
now, let me ask you this, Mark. First of all, next year we're coming up to the 50th anniversary of all that, which should be exciting.
Yeah, January 76, the first album, and of course we've just gone through their first gigs in I think it was March the 30th, 1974.
Right, to see the early CBGB's gigs.
Yeah, well, Performance Studio was the first one as a trio.
Right.
50 years. It's just unbelievable. Really.
It really is, and it's only in the last maybe 20 years that they've really gotten the accolades that they deserve. But what I want to ask you is, being an Englander, like you said, and you kind of were going to see the Sex Pistols, see the Clash, the Stranglers, other bands you were listening to. When you first heard the Ramones, did you see the influence? Because they were a good 2 years ahead of everybody there.
Oh, well, for me, and there's a debate if you go onto some of these punk sites. There's a debate, where did punk start? Right. For me, it's the Ramones. I think Yeah, and as I'm sounding like a traitor being an Englishman, but for me, we've got the punk magazine that came out, obviously in New York, which set the scene. But and I also think you've got to think about the Saints from Australia and what seems to be
Absolutely.
and what
We've done
seems to have
podcasts
happened.
on them. Yeah.
What seems to happen is there's been a simultaneous type of movement with different bands doing things, and I think what's probably happened is Malcolm McLaren, for instance, has seen the Ramones and punked it up somewhat when he's come back to England. But for me, the start it's just it is the Ramones and their influence is phenomenal.
Well, you mentioned Malcolm McLaren and his, his influence you can't deny as far as the English scene. I mean,
Yeah,
he managed the New York Dolls, so he
yeah,
brought a lot of that over to England.
Yes.
The and the idea of making it a fashion statement kind of
no
was
doubt,
his
no doubt.
emphasis.
Yeah,
So yeah, he's no doubt an important figure. As much as John Lydon hated him and all that, all that stuff that went on where they had to sue him and all that. But as much as that happened, I mean, he really was an important figure because so much of that stuff revolved around his shop.
yeah, and also if you listen to some of the some of the other people around the scene in England at that time, there's some fantastic interviews with Joe Strummer from the Clash and how I don't know if you've heard it on, but how he heard the Ramones that first album, and also people the Damned. They say how influenced they were. And some of that I've put in the book. So early in the early chapters where I'm talking about the Ramones' influence, that's certainly brought out. For me, it's just there's no denying that.
Right. And there's the famous 4th of July 1976 gig
Yeah,
where
yeah.
they
I wish I was
went to
old enough to
England.
go to it.
I met
Yeah,
one guy. I met one guy that went to that. Another British guy I know.
mm,
He was there, and he said it was amazing. The Flaming Groovies opened up, another great
yeah.
band, and
And
everybody
Shane,
that was
yeah,
everybody that was anybody at that point, even before they were anybody like the Clash, and even the Sex Pistols were there.
mm,
And I've read accounts where Johnny Lydon was actually a little afraid of them, thinking
yeah,
that they
yeah.
were a gang from the Bronx or
That's
something.
right.
You know what I mean?
And I think the Pistols went to the second one, so that they weren't actually there on the first one
Okay,
because they were playing up in Man- they were playing in north of England on the fourth. But the
right,
Ramones did back-to-back gigs in two places in London, so I think they went to the
right,
second one, which sometimes gets slightly overlooked. But so yeah, you're spot on.
yeah, yeah. So flash forward now. I mean, you've decided to write this book, and what's so interesting about it, again, it's called Cretin Family. What's so interesting about it that I find is it's told from a perspective of the tribute bands that have
Yeah, yeah.
popped up in the last 20 odd years since the band uh, left us,
And a
unfortunately. And
couple of them, funny enough, a couple of the tribute bands were running simultaneously,
yes,
right at the end of their career. But I mean, so my inspiration for it was I in England, I saw five tribute bands, Ramones tribute bands, and they all offered something a little bit different. And on the one end, we had ones that there was a fantastic band called 53rd and Third,
mhm,
which had the classic lineup, and they did the full Monty with the wigs and the levers, and they were almost like clones. Then we had another one called the Shamones, a fantastic band from Wales that I saw. That they were a trio. The bassist is actually Bryn Merrick, who was part of the Damned. People, if they were in the Damned in the 80s, will know him of that. And the Ramones are different again. UK Ramones, they played more of with a CJ style.
uh,
Um, and they played basically the last couple of albums, the Loco Live type of set. Another,
Mondo Bizarro, right, like that.
yeah, another band called the Ramones Clones, which are kind of in the middle. It made me think then how many bands are there around the world? So I started to dig a little bit deeper, and it was just, amazing to see. You've got Japan, bands in Australia, Argentina, Chile, and all with a little bit different. They all had their own nuances. Different. Most of them were playing the Blitzkrieg Bops and the Rockaway Beaches and the Cretin Ops, but some bands were playing certain songs, others other ones, and it just then I started cataloguing them. And I kind of logged about 200 altogether, but I then realised I couldn't write. There was just too many bands to write about. Some of them were more interesting than others. So I did a symbolic number of 74 because Ramones started in 1974. So I wrote narratives on 74 bands, but I've logged about 200. Even now, I'm getting people with emails or messages to me that are saying, I had one that said, "Can I be, if you do a book 2, can we be in book 2 from Japan?" Another band that have just sprung up. So that was my starting point. And what I then wanted to do is to try to write the Ramones story through these tribute bands. And by that, I mean, I start off in New York because the Ramones obviously come from New York. 3 bands, Rockaway Bitch, the Ramones and the Ramones. I start off with them, and as the Ramones then draw out into the surrounding areas as they toured in 76, 77, like in Boston, then we start coming in. There's a great band called Warthog that come from Boston. So I'm kind of linking the two when they come into London. In the gig that you talked about, then I start talking about London gigs, and what I managed to do was to track every country that they toured, and some of them were quite difficult. Finding, like, Czech Republic was my last one that I managed to get hold of, because Ramones toured Czech Republic as well. And what I then done is talked about the stories of the Ramones in these countries or cities when it comes to, say, America and Britain. There's a few more that's featured. So I talk about, for example, the last one is one of the Californian bands, because the Ramones obviously ended their last gig in LA, and so I kind of talked the stories and then linked them to the bands, the tribute bands itself. And some of the tribute people have some great stories, which about actually meeting the Ramones. Not all of them, but some of them got some. So I've got some original stories about when they talked to the various people, and that was really quite good as well. Finding out first-hand experience when they saw the brothers, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I go back. You go back a little more than about maybe 6-7 years more than me, but I got into the Ramones about 1983, the first time I ever saw them, and it was a life-changing experience for sure. It really, for the next 13 years, it even though I graduated high school and started working and all these things, I still loved the band and followed them pretty much up and down the Northeast. I saw them in obviously every show in New York that I could, but also places like Boston. I saw them, and Philadelphia and Baltimore. I saw them. I think that's the farthest out I ever went. And what I was going to ask you is, why do you think there's so many tribute bands? Never mind the ones that were around when they existed, but since the demise of the band,
well, I think their legacy is so great that it's hard to capitalize, but there's something about them, the driving noise, the 1, 2, 3, 4, the legacy of just their clothes. You go around street corners now, you see young girls of 14, 15 with knee-hole pants. The sneakers, the energy, and it's something that has got into culture, isn't it? It's almost like a Western culture of music. How it's people have been so infused by them. And I mean, what's sad really is that they never found. I don't think that they saw this adulation and fame when they were actually alive.
Yeah, yeah. That's
Um,
that's the sad story of the Ramones. That they,
yeah,
by the
You want
time,
to you want to hear something funny? Like one of the biggest hit was that Pet Cemetery.
oh yeah,
All over the place. When Pet Cemetery came out, the movie came out, and then the song "I Don't Want to Be Buried in a Pet Cemetery." I was like,
and
"Wow, man! They're out. They're finally people know who they
and you've got the different types of characters, haven't they? You
Yeah,
know how the you know we all know the story of Johnny and Joey not
yeah,
talking for years. You've got Joey's liberal Democrat, I guess you call him a Jewish guy, tall, gawky, not much confidence, with medical problems. You've got Johnny, who's the hard taskmaster, who's keeping them checked, who's driving them
yeah,
forward, and
right.
the more the conservative. You've got DD, who's the history of 53rd and Third, and the edginess about him, the lovable character who's eccentric in many ways as well. Tommy, I think, that seemed to be more kind of down to earth, a little bit more of a normal guy. And you've got somehow these four guys have met each other and managed to produce one of these bands that are going to be an influence for forever, I think.
Absolutely.
And that is just amazing. I remember going back to Joe Strummer. I remember listening to him talk about them. He very much thinks, how did the four Beatles meet and produce something like this? I think it's very much the same with the Ramones. You've got these four different type of guys who've got together and somehow produce something which is so unique and lovable.
I totally couldn't agree more. You have the Beatles and the Stones in the 60s,
Mm.
and then you have, the Ramones in the 70s, and it's really the same thing. They
Yeah.
they took whatever they liked, okay, whatever they were influenced by, which for the Ramones was this crazy mix of, hard rock like the Stooges or the
Mm.
yeah,
MC5, and then they wanted to blend it with stuff like the Bay City Rollers. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you had this like unheard of, never heard before sound. Okay, that people, for the first few years, I think people didn't know what. I mean, actually, for a long time, people didn't
Yeah.
know what to make of them. Okay, but I mean, all the years that they were on Sire Records, Sire, I don't even know if they really knew what to do with them. They kept promoting them, and
No, no.
the tours was nonstop. Okay, which really, that's how they made their money. They didn't make their money in record sales.
And t-shirts,
Right,
t-shirts. They say as well.
t-shirt
Yeah.
sales, right? T-shirt sales and touring,
Mm.
and they had to be on tours. Do big tours 3 times a year to
Mm.
to make it. And the sad thing, of course, is that they didn't really get to see this. Joey didn't, Dee Dee didn't, Johnny didn't. At least Johnny got to be in the End of the Century documentary, which, he passed away, I think, I think maybe 2 weeks before it came out, if I remember
wow,
right. But he was actually in it. Dee Dee was in it too, but he had already passed away.
Yeah.
And another thing I got to mention too, bringing up End of the Century, is it wasn't, and I think we talked about this off camera. It wasn't until that movie came out that anybody really even knew about their political opinions.
No.
All right, and
Yeah.
I always kind of resent when people go down that road to describe the dichotomy of the band. In other words, you had this liberal Democrat Joey with a conservative Reaganite Johnny. I don't think that was the driving force or what gelled the band or what made it creative at all. I
No.
think you had the four personalities, originally Johnny, Tommy, Joey, and Dee Dee. They each brought their own thing, and you described them well. Joey was tall, geeky guy, kind of
Yeah.
awkward, okay, nice as could be, all right, and had this great rock and roll heart of understanding music. The guy could write a ballad like that.
And that's the other thing. You've got Dee Dee. I mean, you can tell, can't you? Really, the Dee Dee songs and the Joey songs.
Yes.
When you see the Dee Dee in "Gimme Shot Treatment," "Commando," and that those type of songs where you've got the Joeys, the more ballads, as you say, and they had that blend together.
And the important thing too is Tommy, because Tommy was originally going to be managing the band, and Joey was on drums in the very beginning. He could not play well. He looked kind of awkward in the back. They figured, let's put this big guy up front.
Yeah.
And then they wanted to find a drummer. They tried a few people. They couldn't find anybody that played it right.
And Tommy was showing them how to do it.
Tommy invented that sound. Okay. And then he would pass that on to Marky. Okay. Marky has admitted.
There's a fantastic photo, I'm sure you've seen it, where Tommy is playing, I think it's his second from last gig, maybe his third from last gig, with Marky in the background watching him. I don't know if you've seen that.
I think it's at the Ritz or something.
Might
have been not the Ritz. It wasn't open yet. The Palladium on 14th Street might have been there. I've seen that picture.
The continuity is great to see there, and I think Tommy deserves a lot of credit that he doesn't get. I think for that, for kind of almost direct, almost like a director to start with. I think
as a producer too, Mark. Right?
Yeah. Of course, he a lot would say some of the best stuff that he did was with Tommy as associate producer. The first album, of course, he came back with Too Tough to Die as well, with Richie on the drums.
Right.
And I think that was Too Tough to Die with, was almost we're back on it after a couple of
months. That was the idea. They had done the 2 albums, End of the Century and Pleasant Dreams, with outside
Jungle as well. Yeah.
It didn't quite turn into anything. So they wanted it to go back to the original sound. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And another thing too, and I think, the tribute bands, the fact that there's so many of them, is part of what I'm going to say. And that's when you were a Ramones fan, and even now that they're more accepted, it's still the same. It's part of a club. You're in a group of people that you could walk down the street with a Ramones shirt on.
Oh, and people go crazy.
And people be like, "Hey, cool shirt." Okay. Now, back in my younger years, when the band wasn't even getting played on the radio, okay, and they were considered weird or whatever. Sometimes you get a couple of jocks or something that would say, oh, they suck, and they smack you around a little bit. You have to fight a little bit for that shirt that you're wearing. Yeah. And that happened to me a couple of times, and I didn't care, because I was like, you know what, this is like the greatest band, and they're more than just a band. They're like a club, and they spoke to people, all the people that felt awkward in life or that teenage angst kind of stuff. They spoke to them, right?
You're so right. And in I think might be first chapter, second chapter, I can't remember now. I actually say that I had no hesitation in naming it Cretin Family, the book, because not only, of course, it's a great CJ, one of his vocal songs, but it kind of encapsulates what the book is about, because no matter how, I don't know, geeky, depressed, down, the Ramones fans are, there was almost a family. We're part of that. When we went to like London gigs, you'd get people you didn't know about, but thousands of people in Ramones shirts, and you were part of that extended family, and that's gone on now. And when you gig with some of these tribute bands now, it's exactly the same feeling. You see people coming up to each other talking. They're in Ramones fans. They're part of that club, part of that extended, and as I said, call it Cretin Family. And so I think you're absolutely right. And there really was a kind of togetherness, no matter who you are, what background you're from. You got that Ramones t-shirt on, and you were part of that extended club. So I totally agree with that.
So
Mike, I want to ask you. I want to ask you guys. Did the Ramones really get the name from Paul McCartney?
yeah,
Supposedly, that's
Well,
how where they got the
so
name.
so they say that DD used to name himself. He used to Ramon, first of
well,
all,
the way I
and
understood it is Paul McCartney, when he would check into a hotel in the early days of the Beatles,
yeah,
he
yeah,
couldn't use he couldn't use his name, so
and
he
used
would
it
use the name Paul Ramon.
Paul Ramon. Yeah, and DD nicked that idea, and I think first of
I
all,
wonder how he
it's
heard
almost,
about that. I always wondered how he found out
I
about
heard
it.
he had a girlfriend that worked in like a hotel where he checked in. She told
Maybe.
Paul McCartney. He put Paul Ramon. That's
that'd be
the way
lovely
he
to
got
know.
it.
Wouldn't it? And of course, I think first of all, it was almost like a band of brothers, like a togetherness, wasn't it? For them, but they often say also easier to remember just one name.
Yeah,
And what's going back to the book, what was funny now is that when some of the tribute bands call themselves, they have their own name, made up names, and then it was that kind of band of brotherness, as it were. But and now it's almost become like a kind a slight joke doing it, but it's a reminder of that collectiveness. I think even now, so you'll get some of these people. Well, Cakey Ramone, for example, from Rockaway Bitch, she calls herself, and so it's that tongue-in-cheek bit of a joke,
Yeah.
but it's still linking that we're that family, that Ramones family, and it's quite amazing that it's still going now,
Yeah. Well, because it's so much more than just a band. It's like a movement that
Yeah,
as long as teenagers are out there and they're discovering rock and roll and punk rock and everything, the Ramones will always have a place. Now, I know you said you picked 74 bands, which is to talk about, which I think is fantastic since they started in 74.
Yeah.
So I like how you did that. Can you maybe now, in your opinion, what would be maybe a top three that you really what they were doing? Could you do it? Could you say it?
I wanted it to do it as a celebration.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't want to be drawn because it depends what you like as well. And what I found, and if anyone does get the book, I urge those people that get it, have a look at some of the bands on YouTube, because the greatest bit of pleasure that I did was having a look at going through and watching the bands play, because on the one hand you've got some bands are a bit hardcore punk. There's a great one, Too Tough to Die from California.
Yeah.
Got more melodic bands. You've got more headbangy bands. There's a great one from Italy that's almost like a heavy metal band. You've got some kind of London 76, 77, bit kind of that type of punk band. You've got ones that are really gone straight down Ramones style, as copycat almost, the Full Monty. You've got all these different styles, and it's great to see. I'm not gonna say the top three, but some of the ones that really were quite lovely to do. A great band in Argentina who wear monkey masks, and I mean, how hot must that be? Could you imagine doing that? Often sell out to in their own right, 1,000 people, and they're very, very, very good, and particularly the guy sounds like Joey, very similar voice to Joey,
right.
But they play Monkey Mask, and you got to watch it to believe it.
What are they called, Mark? What are they called?
So the Ramones, but it's pronounced in the Spanish way, so I might have said that wrong. And
it might be Lomonos, like monkey in Spanish. Lomonos.
Yeah.
It is based on the translation.
Like you said, Rob, it's the word for monkey.
The word the monkey
Yeah,
Monos.
and then the one I got very close to a band called 53rd and Third in England, who I like to point out. Great story from them. They went through a phase where they had no drummer. They were looking for a drummer, and Marky was coming over to England on one of his tours, like his his own band on his solo tours. So they got up onto stage while it was Marky's backstage in between the support band and when Marky was on. And they put a little advert on his drummer's stall. Drummer needed. 53rd and Third called a number like for Marky to see. When Marky came on, he saw it evidently and invited them backstage. Thought it was hilarious.
That's funny.
So there's little stories like that I absolutely love. Another absolute great band called Acid Eaters. And they're the two Acid Eaters, funny enough. There's one from Brazil and one from Chile. Now, one of the groups spitting images of the four. Another band in Japan called the Ramones. If you want your Ramones tribute bands looking like the Ramones, sounding like the Ramones, then those type of bands are there for you. And what I try to do, say for example with the Ramones, is I've linked the 1980 tour of Japan with the Ramones, where Marky comes up with a fantastic quote. Was during when they played in Japan, there was a small earthquake just very close to him. And of course, they had to say, "Of course, give me shock treatment," which was his joke, which made me laugh. But so I wouldn't say that they've all got something slightly different,
Right?
And that was the thing. As I was researching it, it was quite a surprise to see all the slight changes, then their own nuances. Different styles, different mannerisms, and I love that. Really love looking at that.
Now, as a big Ramones fan like myself, can you pick your favorite album?
Yeah, for the debut.
The debut.
Without a shadow of a doubt. For me, blueprint for punk.
I'll always say the first three you can't go wrong with in any way at all.
Yeah.
But as the years have gone on, and this has changed over the years, but I think I'm pretty much now in my final decision, and I got to go with Leave Home.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. That would be my second. That would be my second. For me, I can't say anything more. 1, 2, 3, 4 in that order.
Yeah. I mean, the first three, and then of course, Road to Ruin is the next generation with Marky, and that album was a little more mid-tempo.
A little bit more maybe
but fantastic writing. And that was actually the first album that they had to actually write to record. Yeah. Okay, the first three they had these songs already. Yeah,
and I read somewhere that they almost did it in chronological order.
Johnny has said that they pretty much put them out in the order they wrote them.
Yeah. But for me, that debut album, I think it's about 29 minutes of Punk Paradise. There's not a bad song in it, and there's some of the ones that they dropped over the years. Loudmouth, for example, just fantastic. I don't want to go down to the basement, and they're just brilliant. And I know many a bassist who has learned the bass by turning one of the speakers down, because it was done through the two channels.
Correct.
So guitar through one channel, bass through the other channel,
and the other.
Yeah, and I know people that have learned their instruments by turning down one speaker and playing along, which again shows their legacy in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, I want to thank you, Mark, for being on the show today. And if we can tell everybody where you could find your book. I know Amazon has it. Anywhere else?
Yeah, Lots of distributors. If you do a search, then it comes up loads of times. I know for a fact that I got an email recently. They've got Amazon's got a slight problem at the moment with the distribution. Please don't let that put you off. It's a case of ordering it, and it is taking a little bit of time. But
I believe that's been corrected. I looked at it 2 days ago, and
Yeah.
I was able to order the book in a reasonable amount of time.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's fantastic to know. But yeah, so if you're in England, it's in all good bookshops like Waterstones and WH Smith's. America, obviously, I'm not so sure because I'm but Amazon, I've been told is the best distributor.
I would say so. There's hardly any bookstores here anymore, anyway.
Okay, yeah.
It's a shame. So, all right, Mark Leadon, thank you for being on today to talk about your fantastic book, Cretin Family, which is about the Ramones told from the point of view of tribute bands that are out there. Everybody pick up that book. It's not expensive. If you're a fan, definitely you need it. It's really, in my opinion, a unique reading experience because not too many stories are out there.
I got told by one person who works for the publisher that it's the first. I don't know if this is true, but this is just what they said. First time anyone's tried to catalogue any band or of any sort, certainly the Ramones, but any sort of kind of list of tribute bands for any band.
Wow.
Now I don't know. I don't know if that's true. That's just something I've been told. So that was quite a nice thing for someone to say.
Well, you're definitely a trailblazer with this.
Yeah.
And, it's fantastic that you took this is like a passion thing for you. You love the band so much. Are there anything in the future? You're thinking of writing something else?
Not at the moment. I haven't got any plans at the moment. It's one thing I have said. I'm in my own tribute band called the Ramones with a Z. So if anyone's in England, in London, we've got a gig on next Friday in Camden Eye.
What are you called again?
Ramones, spelt with a Z, so it's Ramoanz.
Oh, okay, got it.
And we've got a couple of gigs coming up in Camden, so any Londoners out there, please come along.
Definitely check them out.
Yeah.
Mark, thank you again for being on. You've been fantastic, and stay in touch. If you have anything coming up, we'll be happy to get the word out. And it was good speaking to you today, man. Okay.
Thank you so much.
And I will put a link to the Amazon so people can buy the book also. And I'll put a link to your book.
Okay. And Rob, I noticed you're wearing your glue shirt. For people that know, that is Getting Lumped Up Entertainment, which is the title of all our shows. It falls under that umbrella of Getting Lumped Up Entertainment, glue. All right. So what do we say at the end of every show, Rob?
We don't get drunk.
We get lumped up.
See you next time.
Take care, people.